Good morning, and welcome to the second installment in our Industrial Revolution series, focusing on the path to decarbonization for industrial and manufacturers. I'm Akshara Chandhok. I'm a director at Strategy and here at PwC, working with clients across the mobility ecosystem with real focus on automotive and transport, which frankly, is what we are talking about today. So our episode is going to focus on the automotive sector, its efforts in driving the green agenda, and the really vital role that both manufacturing and infrastructure will play in reaching net zero mobility. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by two guests. We have Nikki Rimmington, who lives and breathes automotive, 12 years at Aston Martin, most recently the head of strategy at Innobat, an innovative premium battery manufacturer, and currently acting as a non-executive director for the manufacturing and industrial sector at Browne Jacobson. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. And we also have Grant Klein, who has, on the other side of it, spent over 30 years living and breathing customer mobility, working with sort of national transport infrastructure, with cities, and really focusing on customer and passenger experience and how and the role across that mobility ecosystem. Welcome, Grant.
Morning, Akshara.
Right. So let's. I think we should have folks joining us now and listening up. So what we're going to kind of cover off today is really, can the automotive sector reach net zero? So, I mean, let's maybe start a little bit about, ultimately for this to happen, passengers, car buyers, consumers themselves are going to actually want to have the demand and the appetite to help drive this change. Nikki, from your perspective, sort of what do you see sort of in terms of that appetite from the market and from consumers in making the move towards net zero?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting, I think, that journey of customer or buyer acceptance of electric vehicles. So acceptance and adoption is definitely on the increase. What's particularly interesting, though, is the impact of COVID or the perceived impact of COVID on those adoption rates. So pre-COVID, 2019, I think in the UK, purchase of EVs was around 3% of total sales in the UK. 2020, that jumped up to over 20%, about 22%, and it's continuing to increase at a nice steady rate. So whether it was COVID, obviously you had people living in clean cities for once, and people really started to drive home on green, sustainability, etc. So there was a very strong shift in momentum towards environmental factors, but also you're seeing much more availability of cars and greater appeal of those cars as well. So it's much more the mainstream. A lot of the key manufacturers are seeing sort of 25% sales of EVs within their range at the moment. So you've obviously got policy working away in the background as well, but it's just hugely interesting to see how much through COVID, pre and post, how those adoption rates have changed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing sort of that shift is no longer conceptual. It's very real. We recently done sort of a survey. We're talking to prospective EV buyers. So these are folks who aren't currently driving around in an electric vehicle and understanding, well, you're interested, but you've not got one yet, and why? And the top three reasons are all related to battery range, battery lifetime, charging accessibility, charging duration. So this point around that ability to charge their vehicles is obviously a major one in enabling that shift and that adoption. Grant, from your side, what are your thoughts around sort of the readiness in the UK? How much is the charging infrastructure going to be an enabler or a hindrance to this adoption?
Well, it definitely needs to be an enabler for sure, and we're seeing a change in that, and the confidence that people are having is growing from all the evidence that we're seeing. It's not there yet, and we're all heading towards the 2030 date when you can no longer buy an internal combustion engine car. So there's a need for sure to increase the amount of infrastructure. There's clearly some of that's happening because There's more and more private sector organizations making charge points who are getting out there because they see the market for it. And there's plenty going on from the public sector side, from government's incentives for this, both for local authorities through a fund called Levi, and nationally looking at things like motorway service areas through a fund called Rapid. And both of those are looking at trying to fill in some of those gaps to reduce that range anxiety. But they're also trying to encourage more positivity, more confidence in the market from a consumer point of view, and from those that are providing other charge points. The more you start to snowball what's happening, then the more, funnily enough, it gains that momentum. So it feels like that positivity is starting to happen and starting to come through.
No, I think that sort of trying to kind of work towards getting to that tipping point, I think sort of is where we're heading on that. We talked a bit sort of about sort of that appetite from I guess individual consumers. What about sort of the fleet market and the professional markets there? Are they going to be sort of where you see sort of leading the way in this, or do you think there's going to be this is going to be very much consumer driven? Maybe coming to you, Nikki.
I think it's going to be a combination of the two. I think fleet markets are very heavily driven towards the transition as well. So there are clear policy and incentive drivers there that they're taking advantage of, strong tax incentives as well from a fleet perspective. So I think they will have a significant impact on how things move, and will be fully driving the requirement for the supporting infrastructure around it, and also similarly requirements from manufacturers as well. So I think there'll be a heavy lobbying committee across all fronts as well. But I think it's very much consumers and fleets go hand in hand, and also some of the heavy transport industry as well. I think that's another key consideration as we move forward in the road to net zero as well.
And I think, Nikki, just to add to that, so with my sort of customer experience hat on, you segment the market down. So absolutely, there's that core consumer market, and you just talked about, Akshara, some of the ways that's starting to move. You can then break down some of the fleet, so lighter vehicles, heavy vehicles. You get into the bus market, and then you get into some of the sort of public sector or city entities as well that are looking at how to decarbonise their fleet. All of these add momentum, and all of these add more confidence into the market, but each of them needs to be treated separately. And it may not be quite the same answer for each of those, but absolutely that consumer focus is probably the critical one that's going to drive that change. But there's one other, just Akshara, if I may, there's just one other sort of connection in that, which is that this material change of folks looking at flipping a vehicle, which is a very personal, emotive thing that you often own, to an electric vehicle. It's a conscious change that is probably being accelerated more than perhaps it would have been if that material change in how we're powering them, it wasn't happening. And therefore, that is a conscious point at which I'm looking to see how much people change their buying habits, so that rather than buying, you're getting more into lease, rather than leasing, you're getting more into some kind of subscription or other services. So there'll be some other dynamics that change in the market, but they'll all point in the same direction of that increased take-up of various flavors of electric vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of you've mentioned subscription there. It's such a fascinating one. Lots of buzz, lots of noise. But what we realize and understand is that subscription can mean a lot of different things. But some of the key sort of again the barriers and hurdles that seem to exist to adoption, like the upfront price tag on an electric vehicle, for example, things like subscription can help with. Things like the concerns and uncertainty about residual values, which are largely an unknown, right? The market's not been around long enough, or is not mature enough to really have a good sense of what those residual values might be. Models like subscription can take that risk away from the consumer, and make the appetite, make it a little bit more of an appealing offering. So moving a little bit away from the demand side then, right? We've talked a bit about sort of what that demand could look like, where that appetite is, where some of the hurdles are. But ultimately, it's got to be on the supply side from the providers. We've got to kind of have the right options in place. We've got to have a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes in terms of the supply. we've touched a little bit on infrastructure. Nikki, I think a big part of this is going to be around battery manufacturing and supply. Could talk a little bit about what do you see as the key themes and the things that need to be true for the UK to be successful from a supply side in decarbonizing the automotive space?
Okay, so we talked about demand, and that's clearly a key, one of the key themes and enablers. In terms of then the supply, so up till now we've seen a lot that has been driven by supply from Chinese and Asian battery manufacturers, but we have the rules of origin trade agreements coming into play. So, and not just that, but also within Europe, there's the battery regulation, which drives much more a big theme around sustainability and the, I guess, the ESG considerations around battery supply chain. So there is a big shift towards driving the entire battery value chain into Europe. So, of course, you will see some of those Chinese and large Asian manufacturers establishing operations in Europe. But at the same time, there's a big opportunity for smaller scale battery manufacturers to come into play. You're seeing a lot of the battery manufacturers tying up with some of the large OEMs. At the same time, you're seeing some other battery manufacturers like Innobat coming in with innovative sort of high performance battery technology that plays very well towards some of the lower volume OEMs, and that's particularly relevant for the UK, where you've got the smaller high performance OEMs as well. So that's the sort of battery manufacturing side. You've then clearly got the value chain, the upstream, midstream value chain. So where are the materials going to come from? Lithium, some of the other precious metals, and the I guess the cathode active material, the anode active material. Where are those going to come from? So the UK has some real strengths that they can play to here in terms of chemical capability, in terms of R&D skills. Again, it's something that the UK is well known for in terms of the academic institutions, the research capability. And I think that is something we've heard a lot about, some of the I guess battery players that have struggled to make it in the UK. But I think there is truly a value chain there that can be built and can develop, which of course needs some support from government to make it happen. But at the same time, there's a great opportunity for some of the private, sort of public-private partnership models to really work to develop some of those capabilities to really serve what the UK has from a demand and capability perspective.
Yeah, that's that point around sort of the cooperation between public and private, not just sort of in the delivery of solutions, but sort of in the funding of those solutions is key. And Nikki, obviously we were talking about batteries, but more broadly across the ecosystem, I think that that tends to be a sort of a recurring theme, right? That sort of, if we really are looking to decarbonize automotive as a part of transport more broadly, as a part of mobility more broadly, the public sector certainly needs to be playing quite a strong role in that. Grant, I mean, you do a lot of work in the public sector, sort of at both a national level and at a city level. So, what are your thoughts on sort of the role that those local authorities and the transport authorities can play to really make this, shall we say, the net zero dream a bit of a reality?
And the answer is quite a lot, because a lot of the roads you use are either local authority roads or national roads. But this is we're going to get to a common theme here. We're all in this together, and the amount of entities that are having to play together to make this work. Not because they're being forced to, but because they've all got some skin in the game or some benefit from it. So yes, there's those that are making various components or making the entire electric vehicle. There's those that are making the charge points, and there's clearly commercial opportunities there. But actually, if you're a retailer with or a car park operator, then how can you use this as part of your incentive there? If you're trying to balance travel and traffic around your city, how do you encourage EVs or use EV charging as part of that? So it's fundamentally giving some new tools and opportunities to change or new levers, if you like, to change how you're managing an overall travel environment. I guess a part of the coming together thing, consumers are keen, as you said at the top of the call, around wanting to do the right thing for the environment, wanting to do the right thing for air quality, and that's super, but they'll only do it if, yes, there's a price point, but they'll also do it. It's got to be convenient, easy, straightforward, feel like it's fair. And we've gone through all this in terms of understanding what's happening in the public transport ticketing market, and it kind of feels like the same starting to play out in the electric vehicle charging market, certainly for public charging. And therefore, to my mind, the key things that will make this step into the next level of making it easier and simpler for consumers is, how do you make it consistent? How do you make sure it's easy to use? I'm one of these sad people that's downloaded about 7 different apps onto my phone in order to get charged at different places. I shouldn't have to do that. I'm not entirely sure I understand how much I'm being charged. That shouldn't be the case. So there's a few things like that will help to nudge and make it easier and easier to use and give people more confidence in the service. And if that starts to happen, again, as I said earlier, we get into that sort of snowball effect, hopefully.
That's a really good point. So this concept of simplicity and transparency being sort of a theme around driving adoption, and that's something which needs to start to be, I guess, a key part of the proposition for any suppliers, whether it's actually the vehicle itself, or if I am actually going to get this on subscription, what does that actually mean? What do I get? What do I not get? All the way through to charging and the usage and everything else that comes along with being the with air quotes that nobody can see, being the owner of an electric vehicle. I think that simplicity and transparency is perhaps something that's lacking right now, and that can be improved. Is kind of what I'm hearing here. Let's talk about, you touched on something, Nikki, which is around sort of that, there's the upstream side of it, sort of around the raw materials, and then the battery manufacturing. We've come into the middle part, so the OEMs themselves. We talk a little bit about the role that they're going to play, the ability, again, looking at the UK versus some of the other companies and new entrants who are coming in from different parts of the world. What's this going to mean for UK-based automotive OEMs?
So I think there are a couple of things at play. I think what is interesting around battery technology, so I've been in the automotive industry a long time, and from a supply perspective, you're always, I guess, technologies have been pretty well established, so that you can be confident in terms of the investment that you're making and what you're getting at the back end of it. Battery technology is an area where you're seeing OEMs being a bit more open to hedging their bets somewhat. So it's a very interesting dynamic where you've got clearly a level of cost consciousness around, okay, well, we need some certainty around the near term, but still hedging their bets a little around what the long-term technological or chemistry solutions are going to be in battery. So still very much focused in battery, but whether it's LFP or NMC or what they're doing around future solid state capabilities, they are certainly open to, as I say, hedging their bets a bit around where they go to. So whereas typically they might see 1 or 2 suppliers, actually they're open to talking to a few more. And I think particularly for the UK, it's important. You've got, as I said, the UK is unique in terms of a landscape with the large OEMs and smaller specialist suppliers or manufacturers. The larger OEMs clearly are going to try and benefit and leverage the competitiveness of their scale. So they will likely take what they get through their motherships, big brothers, etc. But at the same time, will still clearly need a focus on the localization aspect. So they will be pushing very hard to make sure that they're not just taking what the mothership has to offer, but they're making a decision that works for the UK, and we're seeing that pressure come out of some of the larger OEMs. At the same time, I think the smaller OEMs will be driving for their USPs. So they will never be able to compete on cost and scale. They will be looking for a performance edge or a competitive edge that sets them apart and gives them a level of competitiveness and allows the UK production to still to be sustainable for the long term. So again, you'll likely see some interesting dynamics come to play, maybe less so in the near term as you're still relying on a lot of established battery providers, but certainly in the medium to long term, we should see some very interesting changes in the landscape. But clearly, that localization piece, the rules of origin, is going to play a lot into how that develops.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to pick up on one other thing before we can move to the next our final section, but start looking forward. But one of the things in terms of that ability to remain competitive and to provide supply, you touched on a little bit earlier as a potential advantage that we have in the UK, which is around talent. Now, this is a really interesting topic because obviously the talent and the skills that are going to be needed as we go through this decarbonization shift, new technologies, et cetera, but also sort of, as you've just described, OEMs competing in a different way, in a different landscape, and having to provide some different aspects. It's going to be a bit of a change around from the skills that have been needed and the talent that's been needed historically. Do you see that the OEMs are prepared for that, Nikki? I mean, from your experience, do you feel that sort of that challenge around the talent shift is something that that we're ready for?
I don't think we are ready. I think the seeds are there, but it's certainly one of the major concerns that the manufacturers have. And I know the SMMT issued a manifesto just a matter of days ago, highlighting that the skills was a particular area that needed to be focused on. And I think certainly when, again, you're looking at the sustainability of investments that the manufacturers are needing to make, they need to be very confident that those skills are going to be available, nurtured, created. It's a big shift in terms of what is needed to make it work. And again, China and Asia have been working on this for a long time. So we do have a lot of catching up to do. So my view is that is clearly an area that we need investment. Again, we've got the potential there, and the UK, it's something that historically we've done exceedingly well, and been able to do quickly. We have good clusters, we have a good concentration of institutions, and we've got some good catapults in place, but we're certainly behind the curve, is my view.
So to get to this, to get the industry, to get the supply in the place where it needs to be, we hear there's going to be investment needed in sort of infrastructure. There's going to be investment needed in capabilities and talent. There's going to be investment needed in production, manufacturing capacity. These are not sort of short-term investments with quick payoffs. So, controversial question then, sort of to kind of move us to our close. With these investments, as we've kind of been really focused on conversation today, as is much of the dialogue around electrification and electric vehicles, the question to you is, are EVs the new CDs? Are we really going to be seeing electric vehicles as the long-term lasting solution, or is this just a stepping stone away from combustion engines or traditional combustion petrol and diesel burning engines towards something else? Are we going to, in a few years' time, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, be looking at upending all of these investments to refocus on, for example, hydrogen? Maybe Nikki, I'll start with you, and then I'll come, or Grant, do you want to come in? I don't know.
Well, I can probably start on that, Nikki, if that's okay. I guess I look at this from it's quite rare that government has made such assertive decisions on something like this, and they really have done on EV. And therefore, from a confidence in the market, that's a pretty strong signal, and that's what's driving quite a lot of what's happening now. So, and confidence is key to this, because as it is in every trend and change. I've sort of tried to step back and think about what's happening here in relation to some of the things that have happened in the past. And I guess things like unleaded petrol change was more of an evolution. This feels more than that. So if there's a continuum between evolution and revolution, this is this is it sort of feels somewhere between the two. It's a bit more revolution. I guess your question was more around, is it going to stick? I mean, who knows? I'm not a futurologist, but I think the amount of confidence in the market and the amount of material change that's going to happen to drive us, sorry, wrong word, but to help us travel in a different way is so significant. And I think there may be a bit of an underestimate of that at the moment in what's going to happen. If we stepped back and said we didn't have internal combustion engine cars around, and therefore there weren't petrol stations and so on, and then electric vehicles arrived, we'd have different infrastructure and different ways of supporting them, and different things that wrap around that. The retail offer, what you do whilst your car's charging, and so on. And therefore, because we've got existing infrastructure, we won't suddenly rip it out and entirely replace it with something new. But it is that evolution of how we think about travel, how we think about what we do during that charging moment, and therefore what facilities go around that. I can see a material evolution around that, which will almost make it more sticky as the new way in which we're traveling with our vehicles. So those kind of things will help it not to become the new CD. I mean, CDs were an important part of that evolution in music, as I'm sure you know, but it feels like there's enough of a physical change that's going to happen in our infrastructure, our landscape here, that means it'll have even more stickiness, if that's the right expression.
Yeah, I am old enough to remember CDs. I realize that some of our listeners might not be, but yes, I definitely did live through that as well, Grant. Nikki, what are your thoughts?
So I think much as CDs were actually an important part of the journey to digitalisation of music, I think, again, EVs are very much critical towards the decarbonisation of e-mobility. And I had a smile on my face when you mentioned the word CDs, Akshara, because, and I think Grant was very eloquent about the fact that it's very rare that you've seen such a consolidated single view from so many different governments around confidence in one single technology. And it took me back in a previous role where I worked for a high performance car manufacturer that was very much around the internal combustion engine, and how strong the government push was very much, we are going to do EV. It's very rare that you get so many governments pushing to do that. So I think you'll definitely get that stickiness that Grant was talking around. You've got all these OEMs and companies making such significant investments. There will clearly be a level of push to ensure those investments deliver a return on investment. But at the same time, EV is here now. So it is at a commercial level. You have other technologies out there, but they're not at the same level and scale of commercialization as battery technology at the moment. So it's not to say it won't change and shift in future, and other alternatives will become available. But I think it's definitely here for a number of years yet, and we will continue to see costs come down, improvements happen. But having the infrastructure is definitely going to support that.
Well, listen, that's great. Really, really a big thank you from me. Appreciate your time and your insights, Nikki, Grant. Thanks so much for the thoughtful discussion today, and to those listening, thank you for joining us. If you want for more insights or information on our services from PwC, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Grant over LinkedIn. And do keep an eye out for our next episode in our Industrial Revolution series on engineering and construction. Thank you very much.